Good morning.
Good morning.
Even before I knew Mr. Peloquin, I knew of him. His reputation truly preceded him. I remember more than 5 years ago asking a Jesuit student, he was a junior at the time, now he's a senior at Boston College. I asked him, who's been your best teacher at Jesuit? Without missing a beat, with a big smile, he replied, oh, easy, Mr. Peloquin. During my first year as president, I like to visit Mr. Peloquin's class. Certainly not to evaluate him as a teacher. It's not my job, and it would have been extremely presumptuous of me to say the least. But to observe and enjoy a fellow classics teacher, a serious master of the craft in his element at work. What I quickly learned about Mr. Peloquin, though, is that he was not only a classicist and a teacher, but he was also a man of God, a man who believed in God and lived it each day and saw his teaching as a part of his faith. Cato the Elder, a Roman orator who died about 150 years before the Christian era, left us a famous definition of the orator. Vir bonus dicendi peritus, a good man skilled at speaking. About 2,000 years later, Philomovus, the best German classical scholar of the 19th century, in a conscious echo of Cato's famous line, defined the scholar as vir bonus dicendi peritus, a good man skilled at learning. Today, as Mr. Peloquin officially retires from teaching and from Jesuit, I hold him up to you, to all of us, as the embodiment of a Jesuit teacher and Ignatian educator, someone who we properly call vir fidelis docendi peritus, a faithful man, skilled at teaching. We are in special convocation this morning to pay tribute to Mr. Peloquin, to thank him, and to honor his unparalleled legacy of faith-filled instruction in the classroom. And it's fitting that we begin with two of his colleagues, Mr. Sabin, who began at Jesuit the same year as Mr. Peloquin, along with Mr. Charette, and later served as his principal, and Mr. Scicchitano, who was taught by Mr. Peloquin, and then later, for the last many years, has taught alongside him on the faculty. Mr. Sabin.
I am honored this morning to share some thoughts with you about Mr. Peloquin. I first met him in August of 1971. Mr. Charette, Mr. Peloquin, and I had been hired that year to teach at Jesuit by Father Hunt, Jesuit's principal at that time. It was a very different time back then. There were fewer than 30 teachers on staff. This included 11 Jesuits in the classroom, along with 17 laymen and 1 lady. There were 9 more Jesuits in the administrative and business offices. The student body numbered 500, about 250 fewer than today. Before coming to Jesuit, Mr. Peloquin had worked for 5 years in the seminary in Pennsylvania. While there, he taught philosophy, English, Latin, Greek, French, and Spanish. When the seminary closed, he sent out letters to schools in Florida, seeking not only a teaching position, but a move to a state with warmer weather. In response to the letter he sent to Jesuit, he received a call from Father Naughton, indicating that Jesuit would have an opening in Latin for the following school year. Since he and his wife, Joan, were coming to Tampa during this Easter break to look at the area, he interviewed with Father Naughton at that time. After the interview, he returned to the Tahitian Inn on Dale Mabry, where he and Joan were staying. He immediately received a call from Father Naughton. The call was routed to his room through the inn's switchboard, since there were no cell phones at that time. Father offered him the position and wanted him to come back to the school to sign a contract. He did, and the rest is history. Mr. Peloquin drove the family belongings to Florida in August and rented a home in Town and Country. His wife made the trip a short while later. They stayed in the rental home for about 10 months while construction on their new home, also in Town and Country, was completed. They raised their family in this home and still live there. One thing that immediately stood out to me about Mr. Peloquin was how he considered the move to Tampa and his hire at Jesuit to be the work of God. He was here because God had a plan for him. He also had no idea how long he would stay at Jesuit. He would go wherever he was called to serve. Walking out to the parking lot one day during teacher planning in August of '71, my attention was drawn to the strange tires on his car. Being born and raised in Tampa, I had never seen anything like them. He explained to me that they were snow tires. They actually had steel spikes on them for traction. Mr. Peloquin rode around in Tampa on them for some time, but eventually got regular tires. Not knowing what the future would bring, he kept the snow tires in his attic in case he was called to go back to snow country. About 3 years ago, I asked him about those tires. He told me just a few months earlier, he had finally taken them to the dump. I guess that after almost 40 years, he finally felt that he had a permanent position at Jesuit and a home in Tampa. During his first years at Jesuit, he taught Latin. In those days, the top 50 to 60 students accepted to Jesuit each year were required to take Latin. When that requirement changed and interest in Spanish grew, the number in Latin fell off and he was faced with a new challenge. The school needed him to teach Spanish. As always, he said, "We'll make it work." He simply took on the challenge and taught Spanish along with Latin. Over the years, as the number of students taking Latin increased or decreased, he had to adjust. More Spanish classes to teach and combined levels of Latin in the same class were some of the different realities that faced him. All of this in an effort to keep Latin alive at Jesuit while staffing the Spanish classes. Through all of this, he never complained. As a matter of fact, I have never heard him complain about anything in the 41 years that we have worked together. He was never a part of school rumors or rumbles. He has been a faithful employee and colleague. As you all know, Mr. Peloquin knows the student handbook better than most of us. He knew things in there that I didn't know, and I actually had a hand in writing and rewriting major portions of it. This knowledge of the rules and enforcement of them has made him a legend with current students and alumni. It also made him one of the best PSAT, SAT, and ACT proctors one could have. When you turn over a class of test takers to him, you knew that they would have a fair opportunity to do their best because he would make sure that everyone worked by the rules. He proctored the SAT and ACT during the 19 years that I was the school's test supervisor. I never had to worry about his rooms. He was so good at it that when Jesuit wasn't a test site, other schools would hire him to administer the tests at their schools. I can't remember even one irregularity in all of the years that he administered these tests. Mr. Peloquin introduced the National Latin Exam to Jesuit in 1978. He was also the first to take our Latin students to the Latin Forum. Some of us can remember the chariots that he and his students built for competitions at the forums. And who can forget the melodic and slightly off-key voices of his Latin students vigorously singing Christmas carols in Latin. As technology grows at Jesuit, one has to look at his classroom as one of the first to use computers to help students learn. These were old computers lined up across the back of his classroom that he gathered from different sources, but they fulfilled the needs of his students. This quiet, private man has been a steady, positive force throughout his 41 years at Jesuit. Countless teachers and administrators have come and gone during his years at Jesuit, but he has remained. It is odd to walk by room 201 and not see him there. Every time that he and I met to sign his contract for the following school year, he would always say, "I'll be here as long as Jesuit wants me." I am sure that he said the same thing to many other principals. Jesuit wanted him again, but God apparently had another calling for him. This dedicated family man with 4 children and 9 grandchildren has been called to stay home to take care of his wife as she suffers with a bad back. I am sure that this isn't the way he wanted his teaching career to end, but in his typical fashion, it is what he has accepted. As always, he has been the good and faithful servant to his family, to his students, the Jesuit, and most of all, to God. I guess God really did have a plan for him at Jesuit, and it has been a blessing for all of us, his colleagues and his students.
I started teaching at Jesuit in 2005, right out of college. For about 6 months after I was hired by Jesuit, my high school friends constantly called me and texted me to see what it was like. Is it fun? Is it hard? Shit, is it weird? I answered, yes, it's a lot of fun. It's usually pretty hard, and it's definitely weird. Not a bad kind of weird, but there were a lot of pretty interesting early moments. While I was really excited to teach alongside many of the people that taught me, I definitely underwent a series of pretty awkward transitions. I still remember, for example, the first time I saw the Scantron machine. It definitely wasn't the soul-sucking supercomputer I always envisioned. While getting coffee in the morning, hey, Mr. Davis, how's it going? Hey, call me Paul. Good morning, Mrs. Blackburn. You don't have to call me that anymore. Call me Janet. It didn't take me long to catch on from there. Mr. Kelly became Reg. Mr. Blanco became Joe. And Mr. Cruz became Juan. There was one teacher, though, whom I could never address by first name. To me, he always was, is, and will be Mr. P. I first met Mr. Peloquin in the fall of 1997 when I was a freshman in Latin 1. I remember signing up for Latin and being really excited. Someone had told me it would really help my SAT scores and that it was just a lot of simple memorization. It did, and it was, but nothing could have prepared me for Mr. Peloquin. The bar was set extremely high from day one, and it remained there until I finished after 4 years with him. There was no excuse for Mr. Peloquin for forgetting homework. Those without theirs would stand at the beginning of every class and receive a check. If you were caught with only a partially completed assignment, you stood and received 1 check for missing work and another for deception. I still don't know what the penalty for getting a check was, but Mr. P's point got across loud and clear. We do our homework here. As a freshman, I didn't get it. I can remember thinking that he was just some old guy who stood at a podium and taught out of the textbook because he couldn't teach any other way. Shame on me for thinking that. In his own way, Mr. P taught us that being a Latin scholar and a Jesuit student didn't just mean doing your job well. It required the modus, seeking more, doing more. Once I understood this standard, everything started to make sense. In hindsight, it's easy to see why a student in my Latin 2 class was once given a negative 15 on a quiz. I understand now why a student was once given 2 simultaneous PHs, 1 for each of the shoes that was untied. Now it makes sense that he would redo the seating chart after every test to reward high-performing students and make the slackers sit in the back. To Mr. P, failing to seek the modus was worse than failing. Being one of Mr. Peloquin's Latin scholars was truly a badge of honor. By junior year, we bragged about how hard his class was. He never lowered the bar for us, not 1 inch, even though Latin wasn't considered an honors class back then. Rather than make his class easier, he actually changed the grading scale. 85 to 100 became an A, so on and so forth. The grading scale, that was negotiable. His high standards, not so much. I witnessed the same thing from Mr. Peloquin as a colleague. Showing up every morning, seeing him at the copy machine, his old school briefcase wide open, hard at work, that motivated me to work harder. That motivated me to seek the modules as a teacher. He was a true grinder. I never once witnessed Mr. Peloquin wasting time. I never heard him complain, as Mr. Sabin said. Not about having to stay late or work extra, not about how much work there was to do. Mr. Peloquin always held himself to the same high standard that he held us to his students. Aside from him quickly grading and returning assignments, I never saw this side of him as a student. I never realized how much work he put in to class every day. I never heard Mr. P let on when he was stressed. He never complained about kids these days being lazy. He did his work well. And when I asked, "Hey, Mr. P, how's it going?" he'd always respond in the same cheerful way. "Hello, Michael. I'm just trying to keep them working hard." Those simple exchanges, usually in passing, encouraged me as a teacher and pushed me. Even as a teacher, I found myself wanting to work hard and not let Mr. P down. Mr. P, thank you. I am who I am today, thanks to the many lessons you taught me. Excuse me. I still wear my 4 years as your student as a badge of honor, and I'll forever cherish the years I spent as your colleague. You have no idea how much you impacted me as a student, teacher, husband, and father. So in conclusion, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come here today to praise Mr. Peloquin, not to bury him. The good men do lives after them, and so let it be with Magister P, for he is an honorable man. Let us honor him by seeking the modules in everything we do, as he did every day for 41 years. Thank you.
Mike. I have the privilege of introducing our next two speakers, the current generation of students enrolled at Jesuit High School that had the privilege of experiencing Mr. Peloquin's class. I was going to take a moment and frame and hear much about his unwavering professionalism and rigor and the demands and the discipline that he brought to this. But I wanted to bring in the piece of the concern, the high expectation and the support at the same time, a rare gift. Coach Scicchitano, I have nothing more to add. Thank you. We're going to hear from a sophomore who had the privilege of having Mr. Peloquin as a Latin 1 student last year. And at this time, I would like to introduce sophomore Mr. Nick Jeffrey.
My earliest experiences in Latin were unfortunately not shared with Mr. Peloquin. My first Latin class was at my middle school, and it was by no means a difficult or challenging course. This easy class fostered a false sense of security in me about Latin and made me lackadaisical in the subject. As you can guess, that carefree and casual attitude towards Latin was completely demolished by Mr. Peloquin on day 1. He explained to us right from the start that we would work harder for him than we ever had before. And as the year went on, I learned that Mr. Peloquin is indeed a man of his word. Between coming after school to write out vocabulary, doing Latin homework every night, and failing several quizzes, it was very clear to me who the toughest teacher at Jesuit was. The only way anyone gets through Mr. Peloquin's class is by doing everything he requires. Now you may be thinking to yourselves, well, yeah, that's how you get through anyone's class. But it's more than just that with Mr. Peloquin. You had to do all the work he assigned just to be able to get a B in his class. But I wasn't going for just a B because I didn't consider myself to be an average student. No, I was aspiring for a thing that seemed all too far away at that time. The holy grail of the Peloquin Latin class, an A. Before Mr. Peloquin, I got an A's in my classes just by doing what the teacher told me to. But now I had to do more than that. Now I had to do whatever it took of me to master what I was doing. The challenge of getting an A in Mr. Peloquin's class did not go unaided though. I was inspired and motivated by Mr. Peloquin himself because he urged me to my full potential by making me believe that I was better than just a B student. By design, he made getting an A a lofty goal so that we would have to stretch and work to get it because he knew it made us stronger students and better people. Mr. Peloquin taught me more in 3 weeks of Latin than I learned in 2 previous years of taking it, but he also taught me so much beyond that. He instilled in me a sense of diligence that I never had before. He showed me how to work hard and why it is so crucial. He taught me what it really means to be an A student, and even better, he made me realize how important it is to live up to my own potential. Thank you, Mr. Peloquin, for making all of us into a closer version of the person God intended us to be by making us aspire to be the best men and the best students we can possibly be. Thank you.
It's my privilege to introduce our next student speaker, Senior Ben Parker.
Mr. Newberg, it is an honor for me to get to speak in today's convocation. Fondly do I remember Mr. Peloquin's Latin class. I reminisce about how my classmates and I joked around with him almost every day, still, of course, maintaining a serious attitude about our work. Several times last year, we brought up the prospect of this possibly one day delivering a convocation. We were hoping that this convocation could potentially provide further material for the day's intelligent class night discussion, a means of finding more fun in Latin class, even in the face of such impending challenges as having to translate Pliny's letter to Trajan or one of Cicero's speeches against Cavalry. Today, Mr. Peloquin will indeed speak at convocation, though not for the reasons we told before back then. The purpose of today's convocation is for us to thank him for his decades of service and for him to say farewell. He has officially announced his retirement after 46 years of teaching, 41 of those years here at Jesuit. On the very first day of this school year, when I discovered that he would be taking a leave of absence, I was understandably upset. The idea of being in his class just one last year had been the main reason for my even choosing to take Latin 4. We Latin students, especially those of us in Latin 4, longed for his return. When we heard that he would not be coming back, we were crushed. I kept on thinking, if only I could go back and experience his class once again. Thankfully, both Father Hermes and Mr. Kelly have taken on Mr. Peloquin's classes in order to keep our Latin program alive. Mr. Peloquin and his class have been central to my academic experience here. I remember back to the days in middle school, my older brother James, in the class of 2011, warned me that in Latin, the subject matter was tough and the classwork was meticulous. For instance, he told me of how Mr. P's class was the only class he knew of at Jesuit in which one could receive a grade lower than 0%. He had tales to tell, some about Mr. P's jolliness, but some about his PH rampages. You know what I mean? Odds are either you or the man next to you has had to serve one of the many thousand PHs Mr. P administered. My brother assured me that although Mr. Peloquin doled out PHs quite often with a smile on his face, he was truly concerned with instilling discipline upon his own students as well as those unfortunate souls with untucked shirts and untied shoes lingering in the hallway of Logan 2. My brother, who was quite passionate about my attending Jesuit, had me convinced that Latin was the ideal class to take. He definitely turned out to be right. When I applied for Jesuit, there was one thing that I knew for certain, and that was that I was going to sign up for Latin with Mr. Peloquin. Today, I am very glad that I did so. Now, I do not intend for you to remember him solely as the PH King, or simply as that teacher who taught that especially demanding class. Mr. Peloquin has been the definition of a good Jesuit teacher. Throughout his days here, he certainly called the students to the Jesuit principle of humagis, a Latin term for more. Even more so did he demonstrate his conviction of the cura personalis, which is Latin for care of the person. That is a concept at the heart of Jesuit spirituality. Now, Mr. P, I thank you. Thank you for all that you have done for us. Jesuit High School will not be the same without you here. I speak not only for myself, but on behalf of the entire Jesuit community, especially my fellow Latin students, when I say that your presence will be missed tremendously. Now, at last, I invite you to address the student body of Convocation, Mr. Peloquin.
Embarrassed. Because I'm not really sure about the person they've been describing. Maybe Alzheimer's, maybe I've forgotten. But it also reminds me of another situation when I was embarrassed. I was an athlete in high school, like many of you. And as a sophomore, I sat in the stands at the football games and said, gee, I can do better than that. So as a junior, I went out for the football team. And I made the team. And I was on offense and defense. Because we didn't have platoon systems back then. We were on the field the whole game. And they made me the punt returner and the kick returner. I had a little speed for a white kid. But in one of the games, when we had a punt coming toward me, I caught it. I could catch easily. Ran into the pile and got up without the football. The other team had the ball. And they quickly scored. The coach said to me, Peloquin, you're going in there and you're going to get the ball on the kickoff. And I don't want to see what just happened happen again. Coach not being put under pressure. That's exactly what happened again. Got the ball, ran into the pile, and up without it. Coach stepped onto the field, went into the locker room, and sent me right away. At halftime, the kids came in feeling sorry for me and said, why didn't you quit? Why didn't you turn in your uniform? Why did you take that? And I simply said, because I was the one who did the wrong. It wasn't the coach. And after the game, the coach got everybody together and said that the one thing that I had displayed that he hadn't seen before was character. And that stayed with me ever since then. And it's one of the things that I remember, that what's right is right and you can't change it. Now I have your letter. I of course want to thank Father, Mr. Newberger, and everyone else who have been so gracious to me during these troubling times with my wife's spine. She wanted to be here today, but now she has a mobility problem, equilibrium. Been on the internet, and she finds mine can do that, so now she's convinced things are getting worse. But since she isn't able to walk very well, or even sit without moving her head, that causes discomfort. I told her to stay in bed and not come. But she did want to come and she felt very grievous that I had caused so much problem to Jesuit, particularly to Mr. Kelly, who had to get back into things again after so many years being away from it. We both appreciate his willingness to do that. I had planned hopefully to teach another 2 years, but it wasn't in the Lord's plan. I take it day by day, and I'm happy whatever works out. But I want to read a letter that I received from a student a couple of weeks ago, graduated in 2007, because it's something that all the teachers standing around here today have experienced. They thank you. But what was astounding about it is, it was a thank you for refusing to write a recommendation for him to the United States Naval Academy. It's something, of course, that teachers have to decide what's in the best interest of the student. And I had decided that he was too sensitive, a young man, to go to an academy that is so difficult and so demanding. And I explained that to him. And here's what he said. Dear Mr. Peloquin, I stopped by Jesuit a while back when I was at home in Tampa and heard you were taking leave. I hope this email reaches you and that your wife as well. After Jesuit, I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia and majored in mechanical engineering. From there, through ROTC, I earned my commission in the Navy, and then finishing up the nuclear power pipeline to be a submarine officer. The 4 years I spent trudging through your class, Latin 1 through 4, have turned out to be the most valuable experiences of my life. Though I don't use too much Latin these days, besides the occasional word or two that will jog my memory, the scholarly work ethic you helped instill has been invaluable. I never totally understood why I was writing necessary 25 times until I got to the Navy's nuclear power school and found myself writing paragraphs down 25 times till I could write them down word for word weeks later when it finally hit me. Back in the day while I was a senior Jesuit, I had asked you to write me a recommendation for the Naval Academy, and you, in your terrible but just way, said no, and that the USNA would not be a good fit for me. I cannot thank you enough for that. Being an officer and seeing what other officers had to put up with there would have been unnecessarily miserable for me and a waste of 4 years. Again, I hope this email reaches you and that your life as well. Again, there's one of those things where you make a decision and you hope that it will work out in its best interest. And of course, I always had faith that no matter how much I may have messed up a person's life here, the Lord could always straighten it out. He didn't need me to do that. And so I'm very thankful for that. As far as coming to Jesuit, Mr. Yende here was the chairman of the department, and when I met him and worked with him the first year, I knew this was the place to be. That no matter how many other opportunities for jobs elsewhere, I would never want to go there. And I thank him very much for helping me adjust to high school teaching. I had never done any before. I also want to thank Father Len back there for a very nice letter that he wrote to me, expressing to me his delight in having been in my classroom and accrediting to me a slight amount of help in him deciding his career. And that always is wonderful to learn about, which is partly why I've always used a prayer for priests in my classroom, because I believe that that is the most important aspect of Jesuit faith, and that the priest's responsibility is really to get us all to heaven, help us on our way. And I look at the tabernacle and I see the three words, Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. Holy, holy, holy. And that's really what it's about. You are on your way, hopefully, to complete holiness, and you will see God face to face when all is over. And so I close by reminding those to whom I gave a PH, I never really did it out of spite. I never held any grudges. I never really took any delight in it. It was much easier to just pass by and ignore what was going on. But those nuns in grammar school, they got to me. If you're unfaithful in little things, you're likely to be unfaithful in great and important things. And so that was my modus operandi, really. To emphasize the fact that the rules simply mean that it's an opportunity to practice your faith and coming here and accepting the things that Jesuit believes will make you a better man for others. I thank you for attending. This is probably the biggest bon voyage party I've ever attended. And I'm very grateful for the many years here and for the faculty, staff, student body. It's been a home away from home. And even though my wife always said you love Jesuit more than me, I knew she was wrong. It's at least 50-50.